Welcome, guys. Coming in at the late day on the first day of trading, this being my first rendezvous, it's a little bit intimidating. We've had a lot of presenters today, a lot of, educators in their trades and their crafts that have been very knowledgeable. So hopefully I can meet to their standard. If not, that's all right. It'll be dark soon, and I'll meet them at dark. We'll fix that real quick. My name is Kenne Helm. I own and operate a business called Trapper Helm Nuisance Wildlife Removal. We operate out of Collier County, which is Southwest Florida, and Lee County. I do local trapping services in Collier and Lee County, and then I do statewide exclusion work. I am one of 4 people currently certified in the state of Florida to repel off of buildings 20 stories higher. So when it comes to high-end bird work, it's me and 3 other people that get the call for the bids. So. Invasive species, being from Southwest Florida, is an everyday occurrence in my world, where some of you trappers up north might be a little bit more into the fur bearing, the small mammals. 80% of my work in Collier County right now is invasive species, whether that be the heavy hitters that we always hear about, the Burmese pythons, the green iguanas, the black and white Argentine tagus, the Nile monitors, the cane toads. These are the big heavy hitters that people talk about on the news, and we have a plethora of them. I want to teach this course, so I want to give you an introduction to invasive species for 2 purposes. One, if you own a nuisance wildlife business or you're a seasoned trapper and you haven't looked at the possibility of invasive species, you are missing out on a very big business. So profitability for you and your family is huge. And 2, this is going to be the push into a full-on ethics change in the trapping world, more on the wildlife management side, right? Because I tell you right now, we're not getting rid of cane toads. Everybody in this room could call 20 of their friends. We could all go to Collier County and trap for 7 days on cane toads, and we would barely make a dent in the population. So what is the trapper going to do, right? We're going to manage the population. Successful management of a cane toad population in my world is when I go to visit my client during the day and I'm driving down the streets of their community and I don't see any squished cane toads on the street. I've done my job, right?
There's a number of communities in Collier and Lee County that have toad patrol.
Yeah, well, we'll get into a little bit of that, and this is why I say it's going to change the ethics, right? Because those toad patrols are exactly what a lot of the animal activists, the really hardcore animal rights people, fear. It's a bunch of people walking around with guns, right, in their mind, even though they're air rifles, and they're pulling the trigger in a community.
Yeah, they're doing nets.
Nets, triggers, whatever. You're talking about mass collection, not trained, not educated, and then specifically not educating the community when they're there, right? So these guys, I ran into a couple of these guys, right? And they walked past a dead toad that was in the street. And I said, hey, you guys gonna pick up that toad? I said, well, no, it's dead. Why would we pick up the toad? We don't pick up dead animals. I said, did you know that the toxin in the shoulder glands of that toad is still deadly to the dog to come up and lick that toad? So if you're out here catching live toads, you need to take the dead ones with you too.
Still right.
So, it's education. If you have a community of people walking around doing that, are they educating the community residents at that point? Or are they just a group of men that are out drinking beer and having fun?
Yeah, they have different philosophies
So.
on anesthesia versus euthanasia.
Yep. So we'll talk about let's go into the business aspect, right? The business aspect is always a peak of interest to everybody that, kind of gets in this wildlife, and it is very profitable. And how, it's profitable, and here's how you know it's profitable. In the last year alone in Miami-Dade County, 35 businesses opened their doors, solely focused on green iguanas. 35 businesses in the last year. Now, where you guys live, how many trappers have opened business in the last year? Anywhere close to that number? That tells you there's money to be made, right? So now you have to figure out what do you do? What kind of species are you going to go after? Obviously you got the heavy hitters, the green iguanas, the cane toads, and you have to set your price point based on the market. Right now, Miami-Dade, South Miami-Dade is getting about $10 an iguana. So for every iguana they catch or shoot, it's $10 charged to the client. West Coast, you get a little bit more, right? And then the other side of that, repurposing. You know, where you have your coyotes, you pretty much got fur. You got a couple other things you can do with coyotes, right? Did you know that there's certain cultures that live in South Miami that will pay upwards of $6 for one iguana egg? On a female iguana that will have anywhere from 17 to 70 eggs inside her during the breeding season. I mean, that's a good chunk of profit. You know, one iguana, that's a day's worth of pay. Some cases, that's a week's worth of pay, you know?
Doesn't want eggs.
Yeah.
Publix.
So, you know, that's why invasive species are important. One, it's profitability in business, and two, wildlife management. Again, you know, the Burmese python. Everybody talks about the Burmese python. It's all over the national news. We just had the Python Bowl. We had 800 hunters that came out. You know, 20 of them were pros, or 29 of them were pros, and 41 was a literal parking lot. Literally. You would be driving, you'd stop because somebody was pulling off the road. And then you'd be driving, you'd have to stop again because somebody's pulling off the road. Hazard lights going on everywhere. You know, Collier County Sheriff's Department pulling over anybody they can. I mean, it was a parking lot, but it attracts a lot of attention. With all that work being done, how much damage do you think we did to the population this year?
Let alone the habitat, all that's gone through.
Maybe a couple hundred.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't released the numbers. It was supposed to be Wednesday. I just got an email that they're delaying the commissioners meeting, so the results will be delayed a little bit more. But you know, we got to get into a program where we're managing these populations effectively. You know, we can't eliminate a population until we know more about it, until we have the science that's supporting the trappers, and we're working together to manage a population in an area. All right, you know, some other invasive species, let's talk about, that you'll see that are coming north. Because if you guys haven't seen them yet, coming north, within another 2 years, you're gonna see them. Right now, we have cane toads, right? Cane toads were introduced to Florida by what? Sugarcane industry, absolutely. So we had cane beetles that were tearing up their sugarcane crops, right? So somebody got the bright idea that we'll import these cane toads that eat the cane beetles, and you know, we can have great sugar crops. Now the cane toads are killing dogs, they're all over the place, they're nasty, and recently we're finding out that the toxins on the shoulders are actually aiding in a new drug that, you know, kids are now using in the streets.
Yeah, of course.
I guess if you look at it that way, we're gonna eliminate one population.
Well, did we do this, the same time Australia did, or was it something we did?
No, Australia actually came in behind us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they came in
Okay.
behind us, but their conditions in Australia were more prevalent, and they
Okay.
didn't have the activity. So people have been picking up cane toads in Florida for many years.
Okay.
And that's kind of kept us at bay without a real explosion, whereas Australia just kind of hit them really hard.
Yeah.
The biologist that's over that cane toad program is absolutely brilliant, and she has got the science down on what you guys might know as the toad buster here in South Florida. But she has built a trap that has a lure, that has the lighting and the sound that actually works. The problem is the mating call, the sound that you need to attract these toads to those cages, changes by a mile radius.
Oh, Lord.
So unless you get those recordings, you know, those traps aren't gonna be as successful. But the cane toad business is a very unique business, right? So for any of you new trappers or people that are looking to get in the business, my son came to me. He's 15 years old. He's getting really excited about wildlife. He's been out on some calls with me. He's got to play with raccoons. He all of a sudden came to me one day and says, "Dad, I want to start a trapping business." I said, "Okay, well, that's great." I said, "Start with the cane toads." He goes, "Why am I going to start with the cane toads?" Because there's little to no overhead. You need a box of gloves, a net, and trash bags. Literally, that's what you need to start a cane toad business. And then you go out and you charge your client either hourly or by the toad to collect them. There's a lady in Cape Coral right now, that's all she does. She specializes in cane toads. She nets about $75,000 a year just doing cane toads. 4 nights a week.
Wow.
Alright, so when you start looking at your areas and you start seeing these things come in, you should already start drafting these plans, right? So when these species come up to you, curly-tail lizards. Anybody know what a curly-tail lizard is? It's a small 12-inch, 13-inch lizard that when it runs, its tail's curled. When it's comfortable, its tail's straight on the ground. They call them a curly-tail lizard. This is another invasive species. It's non-native. And the problem with this species is it eats all of our native lizards, all of our small native lizards. It will decimate a population. All right? It's a big problem. It's not on the limelight because they really don't do any other damage outside of eating a native lizard, which a lot of people don't really care about now anyhow, right? But these things will start in your area, then you'll get the night anoles, then you'll get the bigger lizards that will follow them, the green iguanas, the tagus, you know, eventually the Nile monitors. It's all, they just keep following each other for some reason. But the curly tails, I catch in minnow traps. You know, the cheap cloth minnow traps from Amazon? Genius idea. I got it from another trapper, I stole it from another trapper. I filled this little screen meshed minnow net with crickets. And I set it underneath the staircase, and I go get a burger from McDonald's. I come back, I got 15 of those in the minnow trap. So they're very easy to eliminate, but nobody's putting any focus on them because what do you charge for those lizards? You know, or, you know, a lot of people don't realize they're a problem. They're not doing landscaping, they're not doing anything outside of the native lizards, but they're gonna lead to a bigger problem. We've now seen the red-headed agames, another small lizard that, you know, eats insects, it eats plants, it eats lizards. Again, you know, it's starting to pick up. Green iguanas is a hot spot for a lot of people. Prior to me starting this conversation, you know, I was talking about Miami and the fact that rumors have been circling about a bounty program that they're putting on iguanas. And this is a talk that's been going on for a couple years now, right? You know, I don't know if they'll ever come to fruition with the bounty program, but it's a major problem. They do damage to seawalls, which costs a lot of money to homeowners. They dig in the side of banks, so any HOA communities that have lakes, they burrow into the side of the lakes, which eventually they'll have to redo. A good example is a community called Pelican Bay in Naples. I'll get right to you, Hunt. A community in Pelican Bay called Naples has about 40 lakes in it. 3 years ago, I was in there to talk about invasive species, green iguanas, and the fact that we need to start a wildlife management program in that community to reduce the population of green iguanas, and everybody thought I was insane. Everybody loved the green iguanas. They're so bright, they're so beautiful, we love seeing them, you know, you name the excuse. I got the excuse in the book. 3 years later, they had an estimated population of about 350 iguanas, and a proposal from a lake company to restore the banks of their lakes. 40 lakes in the community. Guess how much the proposal was? $40 million. $40 million split by every homeowner inside Pelican Bay Master Association. So the homeowners, needless to say, after that, did not like the iguanas, and it was a really easy green light.
That's gotta be a selling point, that example.
Well, but that's the invasive species in general. You know, so we touched on cane toads. Cane toads, I always recommend people, any new trapper that comes up to me, talks to me about starting this business, I want to get in, I want to do what you do, I always tell them, you need to first do your research on cane toads, all right? Start looking at potential clienteles for cane toads. And that's where you need to start, all right? It's a good profit margin, low overhead, all right? And that's going to get you in the business. You can take that money and start using for your education, continue your education, learn about the next species, whether it be green iguanas, raccoons, possums, armadillos. As you seasoned trappers know, yeah, you can go to Tractor Supply, you can get a 2-pack trap set for 40 bucks. But when you get on a good 20-pound armadillo, they go right through that door. You know, so what's your option? 60, 70 bucks, 120 bucks for the upgraded steel on the cages to be able to contain animals like that. That money adds up, right? Honey, you had a question?
Do you think that the banning of iguanas from the pet trade has had a positive or negative effect on management?
I think the pet trade in general, as a whole, was a completely ridiculous idea. Going back to the introduction of Muscovy ducks into South Florida. This was a duck that was prized in Mexico, right? So if you lived in Mexico and you had a Muscovy duck and it had all this red stuff that most people think nasty on its face, that was a sign of wealth, right? It was a sign of wealth. Similar with the green iguanas, the cobras, the anacondas, the ball pythons, the red-tailed boas. Name the species, right? A pet trade was always set for somebody to put on display their wealth, right? I have an exotic species here, so therefore I'm wealthy and powerful. Right, so I blame the pet trade in general prior to the epidemic of the green iguanas. I think that given the research, given the problem, I think that FWC did great mitigating steps in banning the green iguanas and species that are doing a lot of damage to our ecosystem and requiring them to get chipped. If you want to have an exotic species in the state of Florida, I believe it should be chipped. That way, when I get called out to your house and I pick up a green iguana and I put a reader over it and see that this iguana is chipped, guess what? Not only is you, the client, going to pay me, but then FWC is going to go back and fine you, so you're going to pay twice for this iguana. And you're not getting it back, because I have to euthanize it within 24 hours. So, I think they're taking steps. Do I think they're doing enough? That's a matter of perspective, right? It's a perspective in your eyes, it's a perspective in my eyes, which might be on two different planes. Do I think a bounty program will work? I don't know. You know, what we've seen is we've seen a market for green iguanas outside of the actual business of trapping, right? So meat production, egg production, skin, right? So just based on those three dynamics alone, what you had in the East Coast is you had everybody and their brother going to Walmart, buying $139 .177 caliber air rifle, and going out in an airboat or a boat and riding the canals and shooting iguanas, which led to increased calls to the local police department, which led to the mayors and the city councilmen screaming with FWC, and quite possibly some law changes that are going to go into effect for these invasive species. We've already seen it with the prohibited reptiles permit, to be able to transport them alive. So I think that, you know, we need to take small steps to mitigate the problem, see how those steps work, and then continue to compound on it. But I think it's going to start right here. It's going to start with every trapper that gets an opportunity to get involved with invasive species, right? How you conduct your business, how you educate the communities that you work in, how you sell these jobs, and how you perform on these jobs is going to be crucial, right? You're going to be on the front line of this. You stand to make a little extra money by reducing our populations and helping the community get educated about these animals, all right? I'm not really going to talk about Burmese pythons too much because there is another class coming up in this seminar, this rendezvous that we have here tomorrow, I believe, about pythons. So we'll leave a lot of discussion of pythons there. Sir?
You mentioned earlier before the meeting about iguanas, and they're debating on the bounty, where they're allowing you to trap them and stuff, but they're restricting use of that, and they don't pay like the private sector. Do they understand if the word competition? They're wanting you to do this work, but they're not giving you the ability to do it.
So, and this is always going to be controversy, right? I mean, I got my business, I opened my business like many of you in here because this is considered the private sector, right? Some of us take government contracts and we know what the governments pay, and you know, but yes, FWC, what he's relating to is FWC puts out what they call job bids, right? For massive agreements. There's been 2 that have come out since I've had the business open, specifically targeting iguanas, but they put a lot of restrictions in there. And they have a max budget that they're willing to allocate to that. I think it's great that they're doing that and they're targeting specific areas. And some of the smaller trappers that don't have a clientele that keep them busy, I think this is a great opportunity for them if they can meet the standards. They're going to get a great education, and the best part about it is they're going to have somebody looking over their shoulder. It's not like, you know, me going out to a client and servicing a client for iguanas. They're actually going to have FWC that's checking their records, getting measurements on all these iguanas, making sure that they're setting their traps and they're doing it right. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a good thing, especially for some of the newer trappers coming in. I think it just, again, it has to be managed right, you know. And I think that, you know, again, you know, you get what you get with the state when you take those contracts. You just got to make sure that you read through them. So we talked about cane toads. I love cane toads. Green iguanas. Now remember, not every iguana is an invasive species, right? How many iguanas in the state of Florida are on the invasive species list? 2. Green iguana and the spiny-tailed iguana. Does that mean that we don't have any more iguanas than that? No, we got the rhinoceros iguana, we got a whole bunch of iguanas in South Florida, but those are the only 2 that are on the non-native invasive prohibited reptiles list. You will have invasive iguanas that are on that list, but not the prohibited reptiles. So you gotta be cognizant about what you're catching. The other day, a trapper in Miami caught a rhinoceros iguana and euthanized it. And he put it on social media and everybody was yelling at him. What are you, crazy? That iguana, that specific iguana, is legal to sell in Florida, and that is a $5,000 iguana to buy.
I heard about this.
So the pet store, the local pet store, probably would have paid you $3,500 if you walked in and gave it to them to sell. So knowing what you can and can't sell in Florida is also part of your business, right? Chameleons. What about chameleons? What do we know about chameleons?
We have 3 species in Florida invasive.
They're invasive, yeah. Are they prohibited?
No?
Nope. So when you catch a chameleon, you can take it to the pet store and you can resell it back to the pet store. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, trust me. But you know what? If you are one of those trappers that believe in when you put an animal down that you use every part of it, what are you going to do with the chameleon? I'm one of those trappers.
Stick him in the blender.
Well, you can, yep. I do a lot of that, but when you have an animal and you don't know what to do with it, and there's nothing you can physically do with it when you put it down, right? Sometimes the best option is to give it to somebody that can care for it, even if it's going to go to somebody else that's probably going to, release it when it gets too big. At that point, a given point, if you make an extra $15, was it worth your time? It's going to have to be your decision. But as of right now, yes, you can resell those back to the pet stores. Curly tails, you can resell to the pet stores. Red-headed agamas, you can resell back to the pet stores. So this is what's crucial about learning your invasive species. In the state of Florida, we have over 500 species that are considered non-native and invasive. Something.
So you would say it's a pretty important part of, especially when there's so many new invasive species coming into Florida, things like that. You say it's pretty important to be up to date on your animal ID and things like that.
I think any education you can get when you're dealing with wildlife is 100% worth it. If I charged you $10,000 to spend a year with me, and you had to pay me $10,000, but you were going to get an education in wildlife, would you spend that money?
I mean, if it'd probably give me more than 10,000 in the future. So
You come to me and you say you want to do nothing but wildlife the rest of your life,
yeah,
and I tell you it's going to cost you $10,000 to ride with me for a year.
that's a pretty penny.
But there's no price on education. How much are you spending in college right now?
Total more than 10,000 for sure. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So your value of education is an institution that's teaching you to do a job in your future. You find that valuable. Coming to me and telling you it's going to cost you $10,000 to teach you what college is not going to teach you about the biting end of animals. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is where the conflict comes in, right? I tell everybody I'm the lucky one, right? I'm on the biting end of everything. So biologists come to us. I mean, there's probably not a trapper in here that hasn't been called by a biologist for assistance. You guys are supposed to know what the animals are, right? You're supposed to know the biology, the makeup of the animal, the DNA, everything, all that science stuff, right? But how do you catch them? You gotta come to a trapper for that, right? Because that's what we specialize in. We just gotta find a better way of communicating, right? Because trappers don't like what the biologists do. Biologists don't like what the trappers do, the majority of the time. Unless you get those rare biologists that you can work with really well.
Maybe you start a consortium.
Are you involved?
No.
Oh, good, then I'm there.
Yeah, but seriously, that frequently works.
Well, like I said, right now there's just a lot of information sharing that needs to happen. I was just with the Conservancy in Naples, which is a big organization. They run the wildlife hospital in Naples, and I was talking with their invasive species biologist. And he goes, Kenny, I'd really like to know if you've seen any tagoos on the West Coast. He goes, I just have a feeling they're moving in here. And I started laughing. I said, you have a feeling they're moving in here? And he goes, yeah, I just got this feeling. I said, I can give you 4 hotspots right now that have a population of over 50. So it's information that he needs to be able to do his research, just like you're asking for the others, that I'm sitting here going, I already have. Here's a list of 5 clients that you can call. I'm a little upset because when you call them, you're going to do the work for free, whereas I'm charging them. But you know what? It's for the good. It's for the common cause, right? So we got cane toads, iguanas, we went over some of those small lizards. 500 species is where I was at, right? What does the 500 invasive species list make up? What's on that list? Come on. No, it's not just animals.
Plants.
Plants, animals, fish, birds, bugs, insects,
Yeah.
bacteria, all right? So to learn all your invasive species is kind of hard. But as a trapper, right, when you start to know this, then you can start expanding your repertoire, if you will, your ability to make money. Did you know they do a tournament every year for lionfish?
Yeah, they just had it.
That's big. You know, it's gaining more popular. You know, state contractors for Burmese pythons, the iguanas. See what other ones do we have? Peacock bass.
Yep.
Peacock bass. Is that invasive, prohibited? No, just invasive.
Just invasive.
What tilapias? Do anything with them?
They haven't done anything officially, but those are one of those invasive species. And here's the trouble, right? We get an invasive species, a non-native species, and when the population gets so big, we kind of wash our hands with it. How much damage is it actually doing? If people aren't complaining about it, do we really need to focus on it? You as a trapper, I'm telling you, if you don't have invasive species, start doing your research, because you're gonna get them. And it's, your spiny-tailed iguanas can fit in a 1/4 inch gap in a stucco block. These things are very pliable, and they're wicked. They talk about a nasty lizard. When we catch them, we snare them, and then we have to put a stick in their mouth before we put our hands on them, because they will articulate their head and they will bite you, and that is a nasty bite, real nasty. All right. What about mammals? What invasive species do we have that's mammals that you can make some good money with? We just had a class on it. They just had a class
Pork
outside.
chops.
Hogs, wild hogs, wild boar.
Does Redwood trapping, would trapping go with the invasive rats we have, the home
Yep,
pests?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
The other reason you want to know this is because you want to know what species you have to have permits for, right? Do you need a permit from FWC to remove a dead iguana from a client site?
Dead iguana. I don't know, yeah.
You go out there, you're a trapper, right?
Yeah.
Lady says, I have an iguana. You pick up your air rifle, you sight it in, you pull the trigger, boom. The iguana's dead. You go to your client, you charge your client. You need a permit to remove that animal, invasive and prohibited, from that client site to your house.
I'm not sure. I'm gonna go with.
No, you don't.
Okay.
No, you don't. Why? Because the animal was killed on site. That animal's alive, and you transport it alive in your vehicle, do you need a permit?
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%. Prohibited reptiles permit. You have to apply for it every year. All right, let's talk about a native snake. How about an eastern diamondback? You get a call for an eastern diamondback, and you recover it alive from somebody's porch. Do you need a permit to transport that animal
Yes.
from the capture site to another site?
Yep, you need your venomous handling permit for that specific species.
Do you need that same permit to put your hands on an eastern diamondback as a nuisance wildlife trapper?
I don't know what the proper sense, but I do know as a casual sense, you do need.
The answer to the question is no. You don't need that venomous captive wildlife license because the wildlife isn't captive as a nuisance wildlife trapper. So as these laws change with FWC, a lot of these laws are gonna change around invasive species, and they're gonna change our business for the native wildlife. So knowing your invasive species, knowing the damage they cause, right? Knowing what kind of money that you can make from them is all really great information to have. And then you sound educated to a client, right? I get calls all the time for, hey Kenny, I got green iguanas, okay? So I come out there, I take a look at the property, I said, well, you know, you got curly tails too, right? What are curly tails? Well, let me tell you what curly tails are, right? So, charge them for the iguanas, and I charge them for the removal of the curly tails. One stop, more money, which is always the benefit in a wildlife trapper, right? The other side of this coin, we're gonna get back on the wildlife management. We need to be better about what we say in front of people. It's just all there is to it, especially when it comes to invasive species. Right now, we have a very fine line where we got half the population that loves the invasive species, the other half of the population that doesn't, because they haven't had to replace their seawall yet. right? But our message needs to be the same. You know, we're here to manage the population. I'm not gonna eliminate everything on your property. It's invasive, I will do my best to remove all of them I can, but it's almost impossible to remove all the iguanas from your property. And any trapper that says they can remove every physical iguana from somebody's property, I'd love to talk to. Because if you do that work in May, June, and August, I'm gonna be standing on your client's property going, what about that one? What about that one? What about that one? So we're there to manage the population. And by using this terminology, right, by coming up, being educated about the invasive species, why they're harming our ecosystem, why we need to remove them, and the fact that we're here to manage the population, you're now taking a one-off client and you're turning it into a reoccurring revenue, right? This is a new term in the trapping world, reoccurring revenue, right? We're used to the one-off jobs. You call me for a raccoon, I set a trap, I leave with the raccoon, right? Some of you guys are getting up there in age, not picking on anybody in particular, but, you know, what if you go to sell your business? On one-off business, right? Let's say you get hurt. Tomorrow you go out, you set a trap, bobcat comes out of the trap and nails your leg. You can't do this business anymore. What's your long-term goal? How much reoccurring revenue do you have on the books that you can turn around and put a fair evaluation on your company to sell it to your neighbor, to sell it to your buddy here, right? This is what we need to start thinking about and evolving as a trapper. Not that we want to follow pest control industry because they got their own set of issues, but it's the way we talk to clients, the way we manage populations. All right, we're not eliminators. At least I'm not. If you want a trapper that eliminates a population, you picked up the wrong phone or you called the wrong trapper. You call somebody else. Everything I put my hands on and kill, I'm going to repurpose to the best of my abilities, and I'm going to manage your population. When we do that successfully over the course of an area, we will see invasive species start dwindling in population because we're all headed in the same direction. We're headed in the same goal. Does that make sense?
I do. Now, so if you go to a homeowner's home in a community that's saturated with these type of animals, what do you tell that person, that homeowner?
When it's on your property, I can legally take it.
Okay, but as far as you're talking long term, you
Yep.
know, you tell them, well, this is going to solve today's problem, but not tomorrow's or any other time?
I go up to them and say, here's my card. You need to reach out to your neighbors because this iguana that I missed today ran off your dock. It's gonna run to your neighbor's house and all the way down to seawall.
So you try to tell them.
Whoever pays for it, and I have clients that say, hey Kenny, I've gotten you access to 5 properties around a canal. Any iguanas you catch on those 5 properties, I'm paying for. So now I have access to 5 properties and they're paying for it.
Do you suggest to them if they go to your homeowners association so we can do the whole community?
Absolutely. Homeowners Association I love. And the reason I love them is because I have a wildlife management program. A program where I will list all the species that I manage. Some of these programs even give my cell phone number that's on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, direct access to me. Right? I have a community, and I'll share a little bit with you. I have a community that pays me $7,000 a month. Reoccurring revenue every month. This community has about 620 homes in it. And every resident in that community has my cell phone number. I am on call for that community 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know how many calls I get from that community a month? 10, 11. They pay me $7 grand a month. I have the flexibility to go out there and determine population size based on, you know, times of the year that I know we're getting into armadillo season down south. So I'm out there scouting armadillo holes. I'm looking at population size. I will set traps to weed out the population of armadillos. These are golf communities, so I'm looking at the raccoons digging for grubs on the golf courses, the possums that are coming out, and I manage that population. You're still gonna see animals, but they pay me monthly to go in there and look at populations, respond to problems, respond to issues. This is big. Right now, I'm the only trapper in the state of Florida offering a wildlife management program and having success with it on top of that.
Now, in these
Sorry.
communities, if someone's home, are you dispatching everything on site?
No.
Or are you taking it all?
No, everything
Everything
is transported live unless it's discussed in person in advance. Some of my clients allow me to shoot for iguanas, so they're euthanized on site. Some of my clients allow me to run snares for coyotes, if they have a problem with coyotes. But that's all discussed in advance. So no, I don't openly go and euthanize everything on product. It's a real trick. And that's where it comes down to the tools of your trade, right? So you can go to Walmart, you pick up that 177 or .177 caliber air rifle that shoots 1,300 feet per second, and it's the fastest pellet you'll ever shoot in your life. Or you can spend really good money and get the air rifles that you can pull triggers on standing 15 feet from people and they don't even hear it go off. All the work I do with euthanizing animals is very stealth, unless you live in my street. If you live on my street, I have a knack to keep my neighbors away. They're the ones that see me put down alligators and Burmese pythons. So needless to say, they don't come up and talk to me a lot. It really doesn't necessarily offend me. My wife gets a little put off by it every now and then. But no, I try to minimize what I do. I don't know if you have grandkids there. I don't know if you have somebody visiting from out of state that's here looking at green iguanas saying they're exotic. And I definitely don't want to be on the 5 o'clock news going, Trapper Helm. Again, there was a trapper in Collier County that was out on a contract shooting Muscovy ducks. 100% legal in Collier County. 100% legal. It caused so much concern that the residents called the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department came out and said, yeah, we can't do anything about it. He's legal to do it. So they called the news station. The news came out. And he's out on the news with his air rifle shooting that Muscovy duck and the duck falling over. That was on the 5 o'clock news. I don't want to be that trapper.
No.
In the properties that you've managed, how often do you see the reestablishment of native species?
Native species? Well, so now you gotta remember, wildlife management covers native species as well. So I will remove native species. We try to keep a constant population, right? So if I'm in an area of a golf course, at the back of the golf course, and I'm running through there at night picking up cane toads, and I see 12 raccoons in that area, that's a lot of raccoons for that area, So then that's when I'll come back the next day and I'll start setting traps. The recidivism rate, if you want to talk like in jail terms, of raccoons coming to that area, you're always going to have a population moving through. Some of these animals are transient, some of them will stay in the area if they have good habitat. But the fact that you're there and you're doing the work, you can keep that population under control. The green iguanas are great because that's my bait source for raccoons. Raccoons love green iguana meat. I don't know what it is, but they tear up that stuff.
It was more so like, say you're removing a bunch of cane toads from an area. Do you see, say, like more southern toads starting to move back in at all?
No.
You don't?
So, right now in South Florida, you have 2 very invasive toads. You have the cane toad and then you have the Cuban tree frog. All right, so it's either the Cuban tree frog that you're dealing with or it's the cane toad. And what happens when you eliminate the population of cane toads, you just have a quiet community until next rainy season. And then we're out skimming the lakes for the tadpoles. And that's where it gets a little dicey because you don't know in the tadpoles whether you're picking up southern toads or you're picking up cane toads. They seem to come on the tadpole stage about the same time.
Yeah.
But if I was in a community and I collected over the course of the short season during rainy season, 1,500 toads out of that community, I'm going to bank on the fact that a lot of them are cane toads. If I start seeing a population of southern toads, then we reduce our skimming on the lakes to see what comes out of the lakes. All right, obviously we don't want to take a native toad out of an area that they should be in. So but you aren't going to know that, right?
Yeah.
If you don't do the wildlife management program, how are you going to know that? Again, it's a one-off client, right? Hey, I got cane toads. Okay, I'm out there, I take the cane toads. And I move on with life. But when you set these agreements, you set these this education with this client and these contracts, you've done great things for you, the client, and the species. Reoccurring revenue, if something happens. Any one of us should have that in the back of our minds. How many attics have we climbed in where we had some nasty stuff up there that we probably should have had a respirator on when we went up there? How many times we opened a cage and wasn't in the right position and that animal came out and turned on us? It could happen at any time. And so my question to you, without a wildlife management program to help with invasive species, your business, right, and the community, how are you going to sustain yourself after that injury? 2 years in business, the largest pest control company in the world offered me $3 million for Trapper Helm based on my reoccurring revenue. 2 years in business. When I tell you the wildlife management works on all aspects, specifically invasive species, it works. Any questions about invasive species?
Yeah. Why does, you was naming off all of those different lizards. Why, if they're invasive, is these two right here prohibited, they're gonna let these other 5 not be prohibited? They're just creating a few, which is good for you, but what is, what is,
I would love to
what
answer.
are they thinking?
I would love to answer that question, and the best answer that I give you is when you file a prohibited reptiles permit, you specifically have to list the species, the invasive, non-native, prohibited species that you will be transporting under that permit, right?
Yeah.
Every year I go through this, and it's kind of fun. I put Burmese pythons, I put the red-tailed boas, I put the green iguanas, spiny tails, you name it. I literally pull up FWC's list of invasive species under prohibited reptiles, and I copy and paste everything. And then they always send me an email back saying, Mr. Helm, brown basilisk, curly tails, red-headed agamas, cane toads, you need to take off your list before you get that, we issue that permit. And that's my statement to them every year. I understand that they're invasive, they're non-native, they should be on the prohibited reptiles list. I mean, if they're doing that much damage,
Yeah.
and I think what happens is, the reason it's not a prohibited species yet is because it just hasn't seen the light of day with the general public.
Well, that's my question. If they've already seen these 5 biggies cause trouble down the road, why are they letting these 5, you know, if they don't belong here, why are they even letting them stay?
Well, it's gonna be good and bad for you. If they put them as prohibited, obviously that's gonna be more paperwork for you as the species continue to move north. If they don't, then you have open access to, again, to generate another revenue stream as a trapper without having to carry the extra overhead of some of these permits.
Yeah.
Between me and you, I'm with you. I think if they're invasive and non-native, they should be under the permit. You should have a permit to transport them and be done with it. And that would stop the sale and trade of certain species.
Right.
You know, if you wanna sell a carcass, that's different, but a live species to somebody else needs to stop.
Cause just like you said, they're gonna outgrow the cage, or they're gonna get tired of them, don't have the heart to kill them, and then out the back door they go.
I picked up a red-tailed boa the other night, and she was sweet as pie. I reached down to grab her, and she crawled right up my arm. She was a pet. Had no inclination to strike, nothing. She rode in the truck with me all the way home.
Emaciated?
Huh?
Emaciated or fresh release?
Yeah, it was fresh release. Probably released that night. And she was absolute doll. And having to put down an animal like that when you have an appreciation for some
Yeah.
of these animals
Yeah.
is literally heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
If you appreciate animals and you appreciate wildlife, and you have to put down an amazing creature like that, knowing that it's gonna be hard to repurpose something like that, you don't deserve to be in this industry, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Subba?
I think that also probably a contributing factor to like agamas and things like that not being on the list, is I went down to a local reptile and amphibian store just to check it out, and on 2 of the tanks there's like a red-headed agama being sold as well as a night anole, and I think there can also be a lot of lobbying with the people from the pet trade, because you know, you can just take invasive species like that out of the wild, put it in a pet shop, turn it around, make a profit on it.
Well, and then we're gonna see that in any industry, right? So right now, we're fighting for law changes. We don't want it to happen. You know, I don't want them to happen. I use snares on iguanas, like they're going out of style. Every time an iguana runs under a boat dock, I set a snare right on that gap, right on top of the seawall where they're gonna come out. And within 3 days, I have that iguana. Alright, so they're gonna take away my snares next year. You know, I think that, you know, as the pet trade is gonna take the stance that we need to make money too.
Yeah.
You know, but again, you're also talking to a trapper that doesn't believe that any of these species that you're mentioning should be considered a pet. I catch alligators. I don't consider them a pet.
Yeah.
Just a big lizard.
It's a big lizard, you know? And it, unfortunately, then what we have is we have trappers like us that are willing to step up and take on the fight. Yeah, we're gonna make some money doing it, right? But then I'm the bad guy when I'm grabbing, as I've come to learn, a bighorn out of a community because somebody decided to name an invasive iguana, and they're upset because I'm grabbing the iguana, I'm taking it off property. You know, so there's gotta be some good talks. But it's all have to, again, wildlife management, manage the population. If you're selling a job and you're saying that you're gonna eliminate a population on their property, found the wrong industry. Go work in pest control, for all intents and purposes.
What's your process and pricing for, like, let's say cane toad or anything?
Oh, look at you. Trying to move in on my business? Man, let me tell you something.
So friends are for.
Hey, make him the $10,000 offer.
I went back to Colorado, right, before I officially opened the doors to this adventure I call a nuisance wildlife. And I went to my old stomping grounds. Now I'm from a real small town in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. You know, most people know the big city that's an hour away from me is Steamboat Springs, but they don't know the small country I come from. And I ran across the local trapper. I mean, he is the go-to guy in that area. There is one trapper. If you have a problem with any predators in Colorado, you call this guy, he gets it done. Ran into him. I asked the same question. I said, buddy, so I'm gonna open a wildlife business, wildlife removal business, right? How much you charge for a coyote? And he looked at me, he goes, I don't know what your overhead is. I don't know what your cost is. I don't know what people are paying in the market. I'm not going to be able to advise you on that. Thought it was a little harsh. So for you, I charge $100 an hour in a community. An HOA, I charge $100 an hour. Bad cane toad population is considered in my book, if I'm collecting over 100 toads a night in an hour period, then you are on my schedule for every week. So I will charge you $100 an hour every week to go out there and collect toads. Once I get that population under about 25 toads, you go to once every 3 weeks. And when I get that population under 10 or 15, you go to once a month at $100 an hour.
How many hours usually doing? 1 to 2 a night?
Depends on how big the property is. Most properties I can do about an hour there, and you'll find most of your clients are only going to want to pay an hour.
Gotcha.
I said, here's the other side of it though. You know, I like the gamblers, right? The gamblers. You always got the gamblers in the mix. My residential business is different. My residential business, I charge $30 to put you on the schedule. So you call me and say, hey, I need a cane toad pickup around my house. I'm going to charge you $30 before I go out there. Right? Once you pay that $30, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to collect toads. You're going to pay me $3 a toad I pick up. Right? Some of these communities love to gamble. They know up front that they're going to pay more money if they pay by the toad. So the start of cane toad season, I absolutely love. The communities that want to pay me $3 a toad, I'll go in there, I'll work 5 hours, I'll walk out with 500 toads. You know, but I hurt myself because the next week when I go out there, there might be 2.
Right.
And a month after that, there might be 10. You know, so you're going to have to price it in your neighborhood. One, you're going to have to find out if anybody's doing cane toads and what they're charging. For all I know, in your area, if you go up and ask for $100 an hour, they're going to laugh at you. It might be one of those things that's $50 an hour. It might be one of those things that you have to do a package deal with something else, you know, until you get that name, that reputation out there, and you get that one client that says, yes, I will pay that. And then that one client goes and tells 10 of his friends that this is the guy you need to call. Now you've set your price in the market. You don't have to rely on your competition to set that price.
Is it mainly at night that you do it?
Yep, it has to be at night, after dark. And there's tricks to it, just like trapping raccoons and everything, right? I tell my clients, at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you turn on your sprinklers. You run your sprinklers for at least an hour. At dark, you turn on every light that you have around the house. If you want extra, you want to make sure it's a good collection, you go to Walmart, you get the LED lights and you put them in your yard. So that way when I get there at 9 o'clock, the ground is wet, the grass is wet, the bugs have come towards the light source, and they're all over the place. So. Oh, any other questions?
What do you do with the frogs when after you catch them?
Okay, so now here's another area of debate. The Veterinarian Association, yeah, says that you have to put them in the fridge, and then after having them in the fridge for a little bit, then you can put them in the freezer and freeze them. That's their preferred method of euthanization. Yeah, I don't have fridge space, and my wife would literally divorce me and kick me out of the house if I put cane toads in her fridge. She did, however, buy me a freezer, so they go right in the freezer. I don't throw them in the trash. I don't take them out with the trash. Why? Because again, when I started this, a dead toad is still a deadly toad. All right, and even though we have research right now that shows that black crows are actually getting smart and flipping over these toads and being able to consume these toads from the belly in, we're not there yet where they're controlling that population. So all the toads are burned in a burn barrel in the back. So that way no dogs can get poisoned. I don't know what the toxin's gonna do in a landfill. 20 years from now we might find out. but at least I know that I'm burning all my toads. So,
Does it smell like you're barbecuing?
absolutely. That's when the neighbors come over. What you cooking?
I guess forget about frog legs.
So we just, like I said, we just touched on the invasive species. I mean, it's a whole big market, you know, plants, insects. Lizards is a big one right now. It's in the mainstream media, or reptilian, I should say, is in the mainstream media. Anything you could do to get involved, you know, is great. You're gonna see them come north. I'm telling you right now, they're moving north. As a food source deplenishes down south, you will see them come north. Right now, my first year in business, I did 150 iguanas out of Marco Island alone, which is a little island south of Naples. This year, I've done over 300 iguanas, and 180 of them have been in Naples. So in 1 year, I went to doing no work in Naples and barely seeing them, to over 180 green iguanas this year in Naples. So they're coming. It's just a matter of time.